Now, why are those two things critically important? Well, it's because the algorithms control distribution and reach of content. Now, there's a lot of misinformation and demonization of the algorithms, but at its simplest forms, the algorithms have one job and one job only, and that's to hold people on the platform longer. Because the longer people spend on the platform, the more
Welcome to another episode of the True Life Network podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ashabi, and today's guest is a speaker and author who empowers brands to scale by helping them stand out and beat competition in oversaturated markets. He's the author of the international best-selling book, 1 Million Followers, as well as his newly released book, Hook Point: How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World. He's the founder and CEO of the Hook Point Agency, and has worked with hundreds of thousands of individuals and brands such as MTV, Taylor Swift, Rhianna, and many others, providing them with business and digital strategy for more than 15 years. Ladies and gentlemen, today I bring to you the one and only Brendan Kane. Brendan, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to connect with you and everybody that's tuning into this.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So Brendan, I actually found out about you through your book, 1 Million Followers. And I took interest in you because, 1 million followers in 30 days, even somebody who's reading the book, sometimes I feel like they can't fully comprehend how to actually implement it. The first thing I want to talk to you about is, how did you come up with the book idea, and how do you know that this was the route that you wanted to go to help brands scale and get the awareness that they deserve?
Yeah, so there's a few questions in there to unpack. I would say, how did it start? Like, how did I have this vision of helping people scale at the highest levels? It started in my first career role, which was in the film industry. And starting off in the film industry, it's very unique in that you invest tens of millions, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars into a single piece of content. And then you need hundreds of millions of people around the world to know about this single piece of content in a matter of months. You don't have years, you don't have decades. So you're thrust into this environment where you have to think big. You can't go into a meeting and say, hey, I've got an idea of how we can reach 10,000 people or 100,000 people. Even 1 million people is a small number. So it was very ingrained in me from the earliest stages of my career to think as big as possible. As I kind of started in that space, I started to evolve into more of the social media space. So when I went to film school, I quickly realized they don't teach you anything about business there. So I really wanted to get that foundational piece. So I started creating my own businesses. And the most cost-efficient way at the time was online. Like, you could literally start an online business for $50 and get it up in 24 hours. So I did that really to learn and experiment. So when I moved to LA to pursue a career in film, I leveraged that knowledge to get my foot in the door because like everybody else, I had to start at the bottom. I had to make coffee and copy and deliveries. And I needed a good hook point, because every time somebody would ask me, well, why did I move to LA? The minute I told them I wanted to be a film producer, I could see everybody's eyes glaze over, because I was just one of 1 million young kids that wanted to be, a film producer. Now, it's not as bad as saying you want to be an actor or a director, but it's still cutthroat and competitive. So looking at the amount of anxiety and stress that would come over the office when we finished the film, because again, there's a massive investment and there's a very short period of time of getting people to know about this, I just forged these connections with studio executives, directors, and producers by saying, hey, I know how to tap into these online traffic sources for a fraction of the cost that we're paying through television, print, magazines, newspapers, things like that. And in some cases, no cost at all. For example, we did the first ever influencer campaign on YouTube back in 2007 for a movie with Jason Statham called Crank. And that didn't cost us any money at all. It was just me simply reaching out and they weren't even called influencers at the time, these people that had large audiences, and said, hey, do you want to interview a movie star? So post working in the film industry, I just kept growing and scaling that knowledge. And at a certain point, I was getting approached by journalists and professional athletes and actors of how can we grow our social media following. And I just developed a set of systems at the time to do that, to be able to test content at scale and find out what types of content would resonate with audiences that didn't know who these people were, to the point of following them and sharing their content. And I did that for about 3.5 years before I did the 1 million followers experiment. And I'd always wanted to do a book, and I just knew I needed a strong enough hook point, because again, starting off in the film industry, I wanted to think as big as possible. And in order for somebody that doesn't have any name recognition, somebody starting from purely scratch, nobody that I hadn't been on television or in a movie or a professional athlete or musician or anything like that, I needed a strong foundation to grab people's attention. And that's where I came up with the concept of generating 1 million followers in 30 days. It wasn't that I wanted to see if I could do it. It was, I knew I could do it because I had tested so much content. I tested hundreds of thousands of pieces of content for these journalists and celebrities and athletes. So I really understood what it took. It was just a matter of why I should do it. And that's where I called a very prominent literary agent, said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this experiment. If I do it, will you sign me as a client and give me a book deal? And he said, yes. But I didn't stop there. I asked friends in the marketing world that had achieved a lot of success to just validate what they thought of the hook point and the idea. And when the response was positive, that's when I foraged forth and actually did it. But I think also people that haven't read the book don't realize that collectively, the projects myself and my team have worked on, we've generated well over 50 billion views organically, and probably well over 100 million followers for the projects we've worked on. And then it's not just us, it's the other people that are featured in the book have generated hundreds of millions of followers and billions of views. So I like to kind of set that foundation, because I think some people just look at the title and think, oh, it's just about him and what he's done. No, it was really a hook point to teach people what they truly need to know to be successful with social media, whether they want to generate a bunch of followers or sales or whatever ultimately they want to achieve. So hopefully I answered all aspects of the question that you put out there.
100%. I mean, you went into a lot of detail right there. So based off of your experience, though, in your opinion, what do you think are, at least 3 major components of what allows you to successfully build an organic following?
Yeah, I mean, number one is its content. And we talk about different hacks and ways to generate followers, and they can be very successful in generating followers. But the reality of the situation that we live in today, just because you get a follower doesn't mean you can reach a follower. So what does that actually mean? Is like, if you have 10,000, 100,000, a million, 10 million followers, when you post a piece of content, that doesn't mean you're going to reach all of them. It doesn't even mean you're going to reach a big percentage of them. It really relies on your ability to create content that does 2 things. Grab attention. So what does that mean? Stopping the scroll, or in the case of YouTube, earning the click, because most of the video views are generated off of suggested videos. And then how long can you hold that attention for? Now, why are those 2 things critically important? Well, it's because the algorithms control distribution and reach of content. Now, there's a lot of misinformation and demonization of the algorithms, but at its simplest forms, the algorithms have one job and one job only, and that's to hold people on the platform longer. Because the longer people spend on the platform, the more ads they can serve. There's a huge myth out there that people say, well, the algorithms are there to suppress your content, suppress your reach, so you pay for it. Well, that's just not the case, because if that was the case, nobody would go viral. Like, nobody would have a massive growth on the platform. The fundamental goal, again, is retention for these platforms. So if you look at the world that we live in today, there's 3.96 billion people on social media. There's 2.9 billion people on Facebook alone. And across these platforms, there's upwards of 200 billion messages sent across them every single day. So the algorithms have so much content to choose from. So they are going to be really cutthroat about selecting the content that is, one, stopping the scroll, because without stopping the scroll, you can't build retention. And then again, it's the retention. And give you an example of this. I have a friend that just hit 20 million followers on TikTok, and I was interviewing him for a magazine that we're launching. And we analyzed his most viewed video, which was around 90 million views. And then we analyzed another video that was about an average for him, about 5 million views. And the retention graph for the 90 million view was, the average duration was 27 seconds. For the 5 million view video was 21 seconds. So we're talking about a 6-second differential that represented 85 million views. So when you talk about growing an audience organically, or even holding that audience's attention and maximizing value out of it, it really comes down to mastering those two principles: is grabbing attention. What are you doing in those first 3 seconds or less to get somebody to say, hey, I need to check out this piece of content. I need to see what it's about. And then what is your ability to tell a compelling story to hold that attention as long as possible?
Makes sense. So what about in regards to the strategies to go ahead and create the compelling content that grabs the attention? What are some components that you can implement to build that better content that people can resonate with?
Yeah, so we have a viral content engineering process that we've developed over the past 6 years that breaks that down. It's kind of a core aspect of our business, is training people into this. And it's integral to everything we do. We've used it to generate 50 billion views online. And at a high level, it's a very simple process, but it's not easy to execute. It's very in depth. Oftentimes it takes 3 to 6 months to fully train people in this. But one of the core places that we start with is research. Because research, the amazing thing is that when we talk about developing a cure for something, we leverage centuries of data to inform us which direction to take. We look at what's worked in the past. We look at what hasn't worked in the past to inform our decisions. However, for some reason, when it comes to social media or just creative content, we ignore millions and millions of data points that are available to us for absolutely no cost at all. So we always fundamentally start with research. We identify what are the performance drivers, or even the drivers that drive down performance. So we look at content formats, we look at content creators, and we dissect what is driving that performance or lack thereof. And most people will just start with their direct competition. And oftentimes, because we see about 99% of people on social media aren't really going viral. That doesn't mean that everybody's trying to go viral, but the people that are really trying to have success, they are failing because they may just look at their direct competition, and their direct competition will probably tell you what not to do, not what to do. So oftentimes we break that research out of the industries that we're advising on or working with to really get a sense of what is working to drive somebody to stop the scroll, to earn the click, and then what are the storytelling elements. And there's so much nuance that goes into that. So my creative director in his previous company built a team that was beating BuzzFeed in video performance. They were doing about 3.5 billion views a month. And oftentimes they would spend an entire week just on the first 3 seconds of the video, analyzing the colors, the pacing, the tonality, and things of that nature. And you may say, well, how could they even scale that? Well, they were producing like 4 videos a week, where BuzzFeed was doing like 150 to 200, and they were still beating BuzzFeed. And that's where really there's a huge component of quality over quantity. There's a lot of misinformation about frequency of driving success and growth out there. But really, to answer your question, the first place to start is in the research phase of it, because you cannot design success if you're going in blindfolded.
So, I mean, obviously, you got to do your research, but let's say, for example, you have an individual who's basically starting out at zero with their platform, and they're trying to build an online business for, let's say they have a product, right? And they're trying to utilize Instagram in order to be able to get the awareness and then drive traffic to a transaction, right? So let's say they're starting from zero and they are obviously going the wrong route, looking at the competitors and whatnot. What kind of research, what things should they be focusing on when creating their content? Because obviously you were talking about the colors and the tone and basically that first 3 seconds. What things should they be researching to implement in their content during those first 3 seconds?
Well, there's an interesting part to your question that I think is a great place to talk about. This is the example that you gave. I would not start out with organic. I would start off with paid acquisition. Paid acquisition is far easier to execute on and be successful with than organic. And I'm not saying that paid is easy. It's not, but it's easier than like going super viral with organic.
Do you mean paid as in campaigns where you're
Yes.
purchasing followers? Okay.
No. I mean, using the ad platform. So you talk about Instagram, using the Facebook advertising platform, advertising through Facebook and Instagram to drive traffic to a landing page to ultimately generate the lead or attempt to drive the transaction right then and there. If you're an e-commerce business, if you're trying to drive sales, if you're trying to drive some type of leads, start with paid acquisition. Go there first, because if you can't figure out how to sell a product through an ad, how are you going to figure out how to sell a product through an organic piece of content? There may be a huge fundamental flaw with your product. There may be a fundamental flaw with your message. There may be a flaw with your landing page, your user journey, and all of that can be ironed out with paid acquisition. So most of the clients that come to me with that question, I say, let's focus on a paid acquisition strategy. Let's get the revenue flowing. Let's drive the customers, scale that till we hit a ceiling. And then at that point, we can determine, do we want to reinvest into organic? So that's an important distinction that I just want to make. And if you're in that bucket, one of the free tools that's out there for everybody that's of massive value is the Facebook ad library, is start diving into competitors. Because in that case, you can look at a competitor if they're at a high level. Organic is a different story. Or we're in the Facebook ad library every day. We do research on the Facebook ad library in addition to organic. And there's so much that you can learn from that for absolutely free. You can study the ads. You can study calls to actions. You can study the landing pages. You can buy the products and see the post email sequences. If it's a lead gen, you can see what their remarketing strategy is. And this is absolutely free to everybody. So that's, in that specific example, that's where I would start. Now, if we're talking about just organic in general, again, we go into extreme depth. We have a long spreadsheet where we'll put creators and individual pieces of content. We'll put the metrics, views, shares, comments, things like that. And then next to it, we'll put hypotheses of what we see as the performance drivers. So we'll break down the first 3 seconds. What did they do in those first 3 seconds that's different than other content? What was the story that they told that allowed them to hold attention? So even just taking a simple step like that of creating a spreadsheet, putting in links to videos and putting the performance performance benchmarks that are available publicly, and then creating hypotheses around what do you believe is driving the success of this piece of content or lack thereof. At its simplest form, like that's the best place to start with it.
Do you think that there's some platforms that are, usually more successful to do so? Or, for example, do you think that it would be easier to build, let's say for sales, right? You have a company who's trying to drive more traffic to increase sales, right? Have you noticed a trend in, maybe one platform works better than the other? Like, for example, does YouTube work better than Instagram, in your opinion?
So it's really a nuanced question. Like if you want to just like a high level answer, YouTube is always going to be more valuable. YouTube's going to be the most valuable platform because a view is and let's put shorts aside, the typical view and subscriber of YouTube, they're spending 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes with you per video versus Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, 20, 30 seconds. So if you look at it from that larger perspective, from a high level perspective, sure, YouTube's going to be more valuable. But like that's, YouTube is much harder. It's like there's a lot of investment in creating long form content that works. Sure, you can do a podcast and put it up there and make an hour's worth of content, but does that mean it's going to perform? No. So each platform has value. Each platform, you can take an audience and turn it into a business. Like I'm not going to sit here and say there's no way you can drive sales through TikTok or through Instagram or Facebook, because there's examples of every single platform working for clients. It's really just looking at the pros and cons of each, and doing that analysis and research, and really being honest with yourself and your company of what your strengths and weaknesses are, from a storytelling perspective, from a content creation perspective. And then you make that determination of which one to go after. In addition, I always tell people, start with the platform that you use the most. Because if you're not willing to be a student of the game, if you're not willing to dig into the content, and I'm not just saying consuming it from just like a consumption behavior, that doesn't make you a professional, because then everybody would be a professional at creating social media content because of how much people use it. But really start watching content with intent. When you see a video with 10 million views, study it. Why is it generating 10 million views? If you see a video with 100 views, study it. Understand, why is this video only generating 100 views? And if you just start looking at content through that landscape, you will pick up a lot. You will start learning because you're taking an active approach to consuming content on each of the platforms.
Makes sense. So here's what I want to do. And I'm going to kind of utilize me as an example, and maybe other people who are watching the podcast can relate to me. So my major platform is Instagram, right? That's the one that I've gotten the most business out of. I had to basically figure out a formula on the way that I built my business. When I started it, I was 30K in debt, and I had to figure out a formula targeting certain individuals. Basically, I know who my competitors are and going to their pages and targeting those individuals in order to generate warm leads through cold prospecting, right? That formula, along with my sales system that I created, took me from 0 to over 4 million in revenue in 18 months. Now I built a platform on Instagram, but another thing that I want to do, I currently recently started the podcast, right? True Life Network podcast, which you're actually episode 18. We've had people like Nick Santanastasso on here, David Meltzer, Evan Carmichael was on yesterday, Tim Story. But here's the thing that I've noticed about YouTube. I know really nothing about that platform. And, I'm driving some traffic there from my Instagram page when I put the podcast promo on there. But the views do fluctuate. And I tried to analyze, I have tried to analyze what's going on the back end and see how long people are watching the videos for. The best one that I was able to obtain was for Lucky Whitehead. He's the highest paid wide receiver for the CFL. He used to be a Dallas Cowboys wide receiver as well. And that one got about 600 something views. But the other ones, range from anywhere from 80 to 100. And I think that I'm just still trying to figure out the YouTube formula, because my ultimate goal with it, it's not really to monetize on it. I want to continuously provide value for people so that they can either get insights from, these top celebrities, entrepreneurs, business owners, athletes and whatnot on the mindsets of what it took for them to make it to where they are. And the reason why I want to provide that value is because ultimately I want to actually create a true life community where people understand what it really takes to live your true life, right? But the struggles that I've been having with YouTube is that it fluctuates. And, I'm trying to understand what I need to be looking for. For example, with the Lucky Whitehead podcast that got over 600 views, what should I be looking for in that video? And then the ones that have gotten, maybe on the low end, like 25, what should I be looking on that end?
Okay. Yeah. So the two primary things to really start and focus on is the click-through percentage of your thumbnail and headline, because that's a majority of your traffic is going to come from suggested videos. Can SEO drive traffic? Yes. But when we're talking about really scaling and generating meaningful growth through views and channels, it's coming off of the suggested video. So when you're watching a video, like on desktop on the right-hand side, you'll see a list of suggested videos. That's where a lot of traffic is coming from. So you analyze the click-through percentage off of the thumbnail and headline, because again, if people aren't clicking, then the algorithm's not going to seed it to people on the suggested video. The second part is, what does your retention graph look like? How long are people spending with your content? And analyzing where the drop-off is, looking at where the drop-off is and actually seeing, what are you talking about at that specific period of time? What's happening in that storytelling? Why are people dropping off, so that you can fix that the next time around? So what are the aspects that a lot of the top YouTubers talk about that may be beneficial to your question, specifically your content? It's called the Jenga theory. So we've all played Jenga, where there's a stack of blocks on a table. With each one you pull out, tension builds. Now you know what the ultimate outcome is, but with each one, the tension still builds, even though you know what's going to happen. The blocks are going to fall. So a lot of the top YouTubers use this in their storytelling technique. Well, they'll introduce a really interesting concept. And I'm not going to talk about it from a podcast perspective. I'll give you an example of like Graham Stephan, who teaches financial advice to millennials. And he's very successful. He's got like 3.5 million subscribers. And one of his top videos is how he got a Tesla for $78. So if you watch that video, he doesn't actually tell you the math behind it until 8 or 9 minutes in. But that doesn't mean that he's filling it with fluff. He's a great storyteller. He tells the background of why he wanted to do it, like what the experiment entails, and walks through the process. But he just knows from a storytelling perspective that the more that he can build that tension, the more he can hold people's attention, and thus that triggers to the algorithms what they want. It's the same in a movie. It's like you sit down and watch Mission Impossible, you know what's going to happen at the end. Tom Cruise is going to beat the bad guy, but do they reveal how he beats the bad guy in the first 2 minutes? No. They set the stage of what the story is going to be and hold that attention until the end, if it's a good movie. So the same principle applies here. Now, looking at it, you may look at your numbers and your click-through percentage is great, your retention is great, but the video still hasn't taken off. YouTube is the really the only platform where content can take off after a period of time. And I'll give you an example. We were working with a vitamin supplement brand, started a brand new account for them with 0 subscribers, 0 views. And the first video that we ever created for them did a few thousand views in the first month. 6 months later, it was picked up in suggested video because the metrics, the click-through percentage was good, the retention was good. Today it has 9 million views, and that single video generated 45,000 subscribers for the channel. So sometimes it does take time for the video to be picked up, especially with a new channel. But again, the same principles apply of how effective are you getting somebody to stop and click the thumbnail and headline to say, this is an interesting hook, this is an interesting story, I want to see what this is about, and then holding that attention for as long as possible. Now, when you talk about podcasts specifically, you look at like Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast in the world. One of the key elements that drove the success of that, and the top podcasts do this too, is they have a separate clip channel. The clips have individual hooks, so each interview can have anywhere between 3 to even 10 individual clips that serve as hooks to bring people into this clip. And typically the clips are anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes long, introduces people to that interview into the podcast, and then that traffic will cross-pollinate over to the full podcast. Because most people are not going to sit down and just watch a 2.5-hour interview right out the gate. Now, Joe Rogan's at a place where people will do that. But when he first started, it was not at that place. And you look at Lex Friedman, who's a good friend of Joe, using the same channel. The H3 podcast uses the same strategy as well. So that's another part of it is that drives it.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So ultimately what you're saying is, yes, you can go ahead and put the full length podcast out there, but you should also be, putting bits and pieces of the hooks, out there as well, and utilizing different captions on the titles and whatnot to try to get more attention and clicks to the actual video, which will ultimately bring more awareness and more traffic. Correct?
At a high level, yes, but obviously the clips have to be good. The hooks have to be good. The thumbnails and titles have to be good. The actual clip itself has to hold attention. But if you think about it, it gives you more chances to win. It gives you more chances to get something that can scale. I'm not saying just by doing that, it's going to make you more successful, because again, of the competitive environment that we're living in with 3.96 billion people pushing 200 billion pieces of content into the world every day. But if you do it right, you look at the success that a Joe Rogan or a Lex Friedman has, go look at their clip channel. Look at how they're dissecting that. Look at the hooks that they're driving people into that. And that's really, I think, the genius that is a Joe Rogan is he takes people and subject matter that you would never be interested in and makes it interesting. He can take an environmentalist, a chemist. He can take somebody that studies dinosaurs, studies ancient civilizations that you may have never even thought about, never ever been interested in, and make it interesting. And that always starts with the clips that drive that. Even though Joe has moved over to Spotify allows him to post individual clips on YouTube because it drives traffic back to allowing people to listen to the full interview on Spotify.
Does the quantity of content that you post, does that play a part in it as well, and the consistency of it as well?
No,
because
was there a time that it did? Yes. But just think about that question, going back to the world that we live in. So let's just take YouTube. Let's say YouTube, and I don't know what the exact numbers are for YouTube. Let's just say there's 100 million videos uploaded every day to YouTube. Why is YouTube going to favor somebody just because they're putting out more content if it's not holding attention and playing to their goals? They're not. Like these companies, and if you really want to see what this is about, watch the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. But don't watch it from the doomsday positioning from it. And I'm not saying that the stuff in there shouldn't be paid attention to. But if you really want to understand algorithms, they explain it in detail. These companies are in business to make money, like any business is. So why would a YouTube, an Instagram, or a TikTok, or a Facebook say, just because creator A posts 5 times a day, I'm going to give him more favorability in the algorithm versus creator B that posts once a week, and they have people that are spending 2 hours with their content. Now, with that said, and I'll give you an example, as I have the same friend that had 20 million followers on TikTok just did 1 million followers or 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and I think either a month or 2 months. And he keeps preaching, and we have a conversation that he did it because he's posting content every day. It's not. His content format is so good, and if you sort by his most viewed videos, he's got a 15 million view. He's got a 25 million view video. Those videos are driving that performance. It wasn't the collective of that. It was the videos, and his average view for video is not good. It's not, but it's those outstanding outperformers that drive it. Now, you can say that if you actually have a process to analyze the data like we're talking about, and you're posting every day or several times a day, that you can learn from it and get better and ultimately have that big win. But most people, when they're talking about frequency, they're not. They're just churning out content blindly and hoping that something goes viral. And that doesn't work, because the other thing that you risk is teaching the algorithms that you're not a great content creator. And then out the gate, there's amount of distrust from the algorithms that says, listen, I don't really trust this content creator, so I'm going to give it limited reach. Maybe I'll give it to 1,000 people and see what happens. Versus you look at a content creator like a Jay Shetty or a Prince EA or a Mr. Beast that have earned so much trust in the algorithm because they are rock star content creators. And they will give them, instead of 1,000, they may give it 1,000,000 people to start with. Now, if the video doesn't perform, it will stop the reach. But you even hear Mr. Beast talk about this, is that he may invest $1 million into a single video. And if he does not feel like it's at the highest level, he will not post it, because that can destroy future performance. And for him, performance is everything based upon the level of money that he invests into this content, into these videos. And I know that's contradictory to what most people say.
So, I mean, no, it's actually pretty intriguing, because I never really, at the end of the day, I understand that it's the retention that you're getting on the video. I've always just heard, the more that you post, the more opportunity that you're going to have, to be able to get more awareness. My question for you is, for the content that you're quote unquote creating and trying to build traction on, in order to keep retention, and this is a Gary Vee thing, is, in your opinion, is it better to create the content or document?
So when you mean create the content versus document, you mean just shoot something and then just try and find a way to make it work versus engineering it from the ground up?
No, so Gary Vee talks about this concept of documenting rather than creating, right? So he's always having somebody following him around with the camera, and then, he's actually talking about the different things that he's going through on a day-to-day basis, right? Rather than saying, okay, hey, you know what, here's a topic and I want to go create something on this topic, right? So this way it's more natural, right?
Yeah, I don't, for most people, I would say no, do not document. I mean, Gary is a force. Like his personality, first off, his personality carries the format. In addition, he's got a team, I don't even know how big it is, of over 35 people working on it. And those people are smart. And Gary's smart too. But these guys, they know their stuff, In addition, is like, even if you took that same team and put it behind like the average person, you wouldn't get that performance. Because, and this is a big thing, is like Jay Shetty, he's carrying that performance. Prince EA carrying that performance. Mr. Beast carrying that performance. Like Graham Stephan is carrying it. Like, they are effective and powerful communicators. So I understand why Gary is doing it, and he's been very successful with it. But again, our experience, and again, we haven't just done this for my account. Even looking at my account is not the best account to look at, but across multiple industries, across multiple brands of generating over 50 billion views online, it starts with research. It starts with understanding what you're creating and why you're creating it. Because the other side of it is creating is, you don't just come up with an idea. Like, our ideation process is driven by research first. We do not come up with an idea until we've done research. And then our idea comes from the research, because we have to have an hypothesis of what's working and what's not working. So is Gary Vee very successful? Absolutely he is. But you have to take into account his personality, his team, that drives the majority of that. You couldn't just plug in the average person into his format or his team and it would explode in the same way. Because if it was, then everybody would do it.
100%. So throughout your career, though, what would you say are the 3 most common misconceptions about building an audience?
Well, it's tough to say over the course of my career, because I started in social in 2004, and social has constantly evolved. Like, I remember when I started in the film industry, everybody was shocked because MySpace hit its first 1,000,000 users, and we thought that was a big number. Social operated very differently then versus now. But so I don't know that I can speak to myths in general over the course of my career. But right now, frequency is a big one. I'm not saying that frequency can't work. It can definitely work once you have your format dialed in. Like Gary Vee is a frequency machine, but they have a refined engine that's working. They know what works, so they keep fueling it. But for the average person, you have to figure out what works first. It really is quality over quantity. Now, once you have the quality dialed in, the quantity can help it fuel that success. I think another big myth that people kind of use as an excuse is that the algorithms are out to get them and suppressing my reach so that we have to pay for it. That's just an excuse. Because if that was the case, Mr. Beast would never be where he's at. PewDiePie would never be where he's at. Jay Shetty, Prince EA, Graham Stephan, none of them scaled with paid. So that's just a fallacy there. And then again, a big issue that we see with companies is they're using marketing tactics that were designed, or creative tactics that were designed pre-social media. Like one of the biggest ones is starting with brand first.
Gotcha. I appreciate that, because I think that's going to bring a lot of clarity for people when they're trying to build the audience, because those are the most common interpretations of what it takes. And I think that, breaking that down and bringing clarity to people that, hey, it's more about the quality than the quantity also, and really just going out there and making sure that you're planning everything, you're doing your research, as you said, plan, and then go ahead and execute on it. I think that's definitely a huge portion of it. So before we end this off, I'm curious, for Brendan Kane, what is next?
Yeah, so we are focused intently on educating and training people in this viral content engineering process, because again, we've worked with companies that are pre-revenue all the way up to 40 billion a year, and it's the same problems across the board for people that are underperforming in social, is they don't have the process, and we have that. We have a viral content engineering process that's very in depth, that teaches people these principles, that gives them the best chance of succeeding. So that's really a core focus for us right now, of educating individuals, educating brands and corporations on this, whether that it's an individual wanting to turn it into a career and get good at social media, or a social media manager that wants to get better for their clients, or for a CEO that wants to have their organization trained in that model so that they can be more successful and more fruitful in the investments that they're making into this space.
So for anybody who's watching this that wants to get access to that training, where can they go?
I would just go to hookpoint.com.
You heard it here, guys. Brendan, I appreciate you joining me, and maybe next time we could do part 2 in person.
Sounds good. It's a pleasure to connect
with
you and everybody who's tuning into this.
I appreciate it. Enjoy.